This is a video on Bhagavad-Gita chapter 5. In the chapter 4 video, we saw how Krishna explains that he is the supreme person, how he taught the Vedic text to the sun god Vivaswan, but then it was lost and now he is teaching it again. Krishna says that he appears in various ages to restore dharma and destroy adharma, that he created the four social classes based on quality and activity, and then talks about Brahman in six forms and describes six kinds of sacrifices which can be combined by different individuals to create their personal life lived for sacrifices and spiritual progress. Then Krishna says that these six kinds of sacrifices are the essence of morality, happiness, and knowledge, and that this knowledge of sacrifices is the most sublime reality in the universe. Finally, Krishna asks Arjuna to fight. And yet, despite all these elaborate descriptions, in the beginning of the 5th chapter, Arjuna asks a rhetorical question as follows. Arjuna says, "Sometimes you ask me to renounce and then you ask me to work. What do you actually want?" And then Krishna begins describing the nature of a transcendental person. The idea is quite simple, namely, that if you are confused about the relevance and importance of different yoga paths, then we should talk about the destination state instead of the paths. The destination state is the complete perfection of all yoga paths, although each yoga path delivers parts of that complete perfection in different sequences. For instance, those following the Jnana Yoga path develop the devotion of Bhakti Yoga toward the end of their perfection of knowledge, while those following the Bhakti Yoga path develop the knowledge of Jnana Yoga toward the end of perfection of their devotion. Similarly, those doing Karma Yoga get mind control toward the end of the perfection of Karma Yoga, while those doing Dhyana Yoga do selfless duties toward the end of the perfection of Dhyana Yoga. Ultimately, in the perfectional state, we are filled with knowledge, we perform our duties selflessly, our mind is not disturbed, and we are devoted to the Supreme Lord. The destination state contains the results of all the paths, and each path helps us reach a different part of the destination state. And thus, if we are confused about the yoga paths, we should change the focus from the path to the destination, and then the confusion disappears. The chapter 5 is a pause, retrospect, recapitulate, summarize, integrate, and repeat stage in a conversation. This type of thing almost never happens in the Upanishad or the Saddarshana, i.e., the six philosophical treatises, which are strictly linear and progressive. It happens a little more in the Tantra and Purana texts, which record diverse conversations between advanced personalities. And while there is some repetition across the different conversations, there is hardly any repetition within one conversation. But there are summaries in the beginning and at the end. Finally, repetition, recapitulation, summarization, and integration happens a lot in the Itihasa or history texts. And of course, as we know, Bhagavad Gita is a part of the Mahabharata, which is well known to be an Itihasa. All the Vedic texts are not meant for everyone. Rather, there is a ladder of texts meant for different readers. Darshan and Upanishad are for the most advanced readers. Purana and Tantra are for the intermediate level readers, and Itihasa are for the common readers. To explain this contrast in a numerical way, the Mahabharata has 100,000 verses, the Bhagavad Gita has 700 verses, and the Vedanta Sutra has 555 verses. And so the Mahabharata presents teachings in the form of stories over 100,000 verses. Then they are summarized in a conversation between Arjuna and Krishna in 700 verses. And all the Vedas, including Itihasa, Tantra, Purana, Upanishad, and Darshan, are summed up in just 555 verses in the Vedanta Sutra. So, summary or expansion, linear or circular, and slow or fast, depends on the text and the reader. Bhagavad-Gita is an Itihasa text, so everything is stated in different ways, repeated multiple times, and integrated many times. In this regard, we have to understand some subtle differences between many kinds of sacrifices, their varied combinations, and then their integrations. Many kinds of sacrifices exist for people with different natures. Some people are inclined toward knowledge called jnana, some toward doing their moral duties called karma, some towards introspection and meditation called dhyana, some towards rituals, deity worship, and chanting mantras called bhakti, some toward bringing a change to the world by taking the mood of Ishvara to act like him, and some toward transcending the world and the cycle of life and death called mukti. These are the 6 distinct motivations for sincere people coming to Dharma, and they are all welcomed. Due to these 6 motivations, there are 6 kinds of yoga or yajna. Then one person may combine one or more of these yoga or yajna paths. For example, someone may personally pursue knowledge and teach it to others. Others may learn for themselves and then lead a moral life. Yet others may learn and then try to realize it through meditation and introspection, and so on. Since there are 6 kinds of yoga or yajna, there are many combinations. However, someone might ask, are all these people headed to different destinations, or do they have a common goal? In other words, are these diverse, different, and incompatible religions? Or are these one religion being practiced by many in many different ways? Those who know the Vedic tradition already know the answer to this question, which is that despite 6 kinds of yoga and yajna and their many combinations, the Vedic tradition is one system. This is not obvious to outsiders, and many people in the last few centuries have been puzzled and perplexed by the diversity. Some casual and naive readers have even concluded that the unity of the Vedic tradition doesn't exist and people simply made up their own paths, that Hinduism is a collection of things, not one thing. And so the 5th chapter is about going from a collection of things to one thing. It is about establishing the unity in diversity, the oneness in manyness. In some ways, this was explained in the 4th chapter when Krishna described the 6 aspects of Brahma, which means there is one thing with 6 faces. But then Krishna dived into the 6 faces, which include opposites like renunciation and engagement, which may sound confusing to many people. And so, by asking a rhetorical question about whether he should follow renunciation or engagement, Arjun brings back the question of unity in diversity again, and Krishna responds by integrating all these diverse paths in more explicit ways than before, explaining how the same thing is one and many. The process of all integrations in the Vedic tradition involves aspects and ladders. To give the example of a dice, there are 6 faces in a dice, which are the different aspects of the dice. In one sense, all the aspects are equal, for otherwise the dice would be biased. But in another sense, each face of the dice has a different number printed on it, due to which the faces can be counted as first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. And so there are 6 faces, each face is equal, and yet the face with the number 2 on it is bigger than the face with the number 1 on it. This is the aspect and ladder integration. There are multiple aspects. Each aspect is equally important, and yet there is an order or sequence between the aspects. If we keep this example in mind, then there is no confusion. We can also give the example of a body with head, hands, belly, and legs. These are aspects of the body. Nobody wants to cut off any part of the body. Everyone wants all the body parts intact. So all the body parts are important. And yet, the head is more important than the legs. The legs are the least complicated part of the body. The hands are more complex. The torso is even more complex. And the head is the most complex. The head also controls the other body parts. So there is a representation of the legs, hands, and torso in the head. And yet, the head will not exist in isolation from the hands, legs, and the torso. So whether we want to think in terms of a simple thing like a dice or a more complex thing like a human body, the diversity, equality, and hierarchy are easily illustrated. Multiple problems arise when we try to understand aspects and ladders in binary logic. Because under binary logic, diversity cannot be equality and equality cannot be hierarchy. For example, in India, there is enormous socio-cultural linguistic diversity, and Western sociologists think that there can never be integration because in their mind integration requires socio-cultural linguistic uniformity. And so they try to destroy diversity to create uniformity and homogeneity like in the Western countries. Then they think that to achieve uniformity, hierarchy must be removed. So they create stories of oppression and discrimination. That is because under binary logic, we can never think of reality as diversity, equality, and hierarchy. If there is diversity, there is no equality. If there is equality, there is no hierarchy. All those who undergo Western education imbibe binary thinking, and after that, they cannot comprehend diversity, equality, and hierarchy at once. And so, the example of a dice can help us reconcile diversity, equality, and hierarchy. There are six faces of a dice, which is diversity. All the faces have the same shape and size, which is equality. And each face has a bigger or smaller number, which is hierarchy. This is true of Krishna as well. He looks different from us, which is diversity. However, he applies the same standard to us as he applies to himself, which is equality. Finally, he is the whole person and we are part persons, which is the hierarchy. In the same way, there are six yoga paths, which is diversity. Each yoga path is necessary, which is equality. And yet there is a complete yoga of devotion to Krishna, which includes all other yoga paths, which is hierarchy. The completeness of devotion to Krishna is due to the fact that Krishna is the complete yogi. So if we want to become fully devoted to him, then from that devotion we get all aspects of yoga like him. Although we still don't become as complete as Krishna. And so in this chapter, diversity, equality, and hierarchy thinking is applied to yoga paths by discussing the presence of their results in the Transcendentalist. We earlier discussed the unity of karma, jnana, and bhakti as the three aspects of the soul called morality, rationality, and emotionality. We talked about the six aspects of a sacrifice being the different aspects of Brahma as the six aspected nature of Ishvara and as the different aspects of person called will, cognition, cognition, emotion, intention, and relation. But here is one more opportunity to discuss this multi-aspected nature of perfection to get rid of either or binary thinking. There are multiple yoga paths, which is diversity. They are all necessary, which is equality. And they are progressive, which is hierarchy. We have to discard binary thinking to conceive diversity, equality, and hierarchy at once. That is as easy as remembering that a dice has six faces, all equal in shape and size, and yet each face has a bigger or smaller number on it. Multiple problems arise if we try to split the six faces of a dice into six independent things, not as aspects of one thing. Arjuna opens the fifth chapter by accusing Krishna of doublespeak. He says, on one hand, you talk about karma sannyas, by which Arjuna means renouncing the work, and on the other hand, you talk about karma yoga, which Arjuna means union through work. As we have discussed earlier, karma has two meanings. The first meaning is activity, and the second meaning is result of activity. We can call these action and reaction. Since the reaction of action is also an action, therefore both are called by the same word. But the context of speaking demarcates whether we are talking about action or reaction. And so Arjun relies on this ambiguity in the meaning of karma to imply that karma sannyas means renouncing the action rather than renouncing the reaction by renouncing the desire for results. And then he contrasts it to karma yoga, in which actions are not renounced, but the reactions are renounced by renouncing the desire for results. Factually, if we take karma to mean reaction rather than action, then karma sannyas has the same meaning as karma yoga. But Arjun creates the illusion of a contradiction. Many Vaishnavacharyas have explained these illusions as Yogamaya, not Mahamaya. Under Mahamaya, a person becomes envious of Ishvara and then rejects his company. But under Yogamaya, a person becomes confused and asks questions, but then accepts. So the Vaishnavacharyas explain that Arjun is not so foolish as to not be able to distinguish between the action and reaction meanings of karma. And yet, either to facilitate Krishna speaking the Bhagavad-Gita or under Krishna's Yogamaya deliberately confusing him to facilitate Krishna speaking the Bhagavad-Gita to be recorded for posterity, Arjun makes these confusing statements. The symptom that Arjun is not under the influence of Mahamaya is that he hasn't become envious, disobedient, or an individualistic thinker. From the Vedic text, we know that even in the spiritual world, the devotees of Krishna accuse him of cheating, stealing, lying, and doublespeak. But they never stop loving Krishna and never think that Krishna is so bad that they must leave him. They either pretend that Krishna is very bad or Krishna makes them think that he is very bad, so that they will accuse Krishna of cheating, stealing, lying, and doublespeak, so that Krishna will apologize or explain himself or reverse accuse them of cheating, stealing, lying, and doublespeak, all of which are factually true. For example, in this case, it is true that karma sannyas and karma yoga are mutually contradictory if we take the action meaning of karma. And it is also true that karma sannyas and karma yoga have the same meaning if we take the reaction meaning of karma. So Arjun accusing Krishna of doublespeak is true in one sense, and Krishna defending himself of being consistent is true in another sense. Similarly, the gopis accuse Krishna of stealing their butter, but they hide behind a door or pillar to watch Krishna steal their butter rather than stopping him. So if we want to know how the gopis want Krishna to steal their butter and yet accuse him of being a thief, then we know how both sides of the situation are true at once. And so an advanced realization is that binary logic exists even in the spiritual world. And yet, it is meant to create confusion, which is very enjoyable and pleasing, because emotionality is integrated with rationality. The same confusion is very disturbing and displeasing in the material world because emotionality is separated from rationality. In both cases, confusion is created by multiple meanings of words, such as karma meaning both action and reaction. And yet, because no love is lost while using the same word with different meanings, life becomes a play of words rather than a war of words. And so Arjun accusing Krishna of doublespeak is play of words, not a war of words. Binary logic creates both word play and word war. If there is love, it is play of words, but otherwise it is war of words. To Arjun's apparent contradiction between karma sannyas and karma yoga, Krishna responds by saying that both are good for liberation, and yet karma yoga is better than karma sannyas. Let's give one example of each of these. First, in the Vedic tradition, there are four stages of life called brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyas. The first half of life is spent learning how to live in the world and then implement that learning. Then the second half of life is spent learning how to detach from the world and then implement that learning. Sannyas, or the final stage of life, renounces worldly activities. So this is an example of karma sannyas. And yet, even a sannyasi is not ideally idle. Even a sannyasi takes on the duty of traveling and teaching. Shankaracharya practiced this kind of sannyas when he traveled across the length and breadth of India, debated with other schools, defeated them in debates, converted them into his disciples, and destroyed alternative schools. Subsequently, Vaishnavacharyas also followed this precedent to various extents, some more and some less. And so, while sannyas is good, even a sannyasi is not idle. Rather, even a sannyasi works as a karma yogi, which means acting without expecting results. Factually, unless one renounces the desire for results, he cannot teach the complete and perfect truth. We see so many sannyasis eager to collect disciples, and for doing that, they compromise the truth. Instead, they teach what will please their audience and then help them get disciples. As a result, these so-called sannyasis never criticize falsehoods, never engage in debates with other schools or religions, never defeat them, and never destroy alternative ways of thinking. They are so eager for acceptance and adoration, and so afraid of rejection and abandonment that they never speak on controversial topics. Their ideology is live and let live. So these sannyasis are not followers of Shankaracharya or any of the later Vaishnavacharyas. Their live and let live ideology is designed for their convenience and comfort, clearly indicating the absence of renunciation. Sannyas doesn't mean shaving one's head and changing one's clothes. There must be inner renunciation in the form of detachment from worldly adoration and worship, aversion to the untruth, and then inner attachment to the truth. If these things are missing, then the person is a pretender and not a genuine sannyasi. He acts to collect followers and worshippers, not in what Krishna calls karma yoga. A real sannyasi is one who speaks the truth, whether or not he gets followers, disciples, worshippers, and adoration. In clearly speaking the truth without fear of material gain or loss, he becomes a karma yogi. Meanwhile, those who speak what gets them followers and disciples and don't speak the truth, don't criticize falsehoods, and don't try to destroy adharma and establish dharma are simply cheaters rather than sannyasis. They may shave their heads, change their clothes, carry a staff, and put on marks on the forehead. But such a person cannot give others detachment because he is himself not detached. He promises liberation, but he doesn't clear the four human defects of misperception, misconception, hallucination, and cheating, which actually cause material bondage. And so the disciple gets no liberation, but the guru gets his worship and adoration. This is not even an honest profit and loss business, let alone sannyas. It is simply cheating. And so we must know the meaning of karma, karma sannyas, and karma yoga. The term karma means I do an honest business in which I think of profit and loss and provide useful goods and services for money. Then, karma sannyas means I can live alone. I don't need the world. I can retire in a forest and focus on my spiritual advancement. Finally, karma yoga means I come out of the retirement in a forest and work for the greatest good, not for individualistic aggrandizement of the ego. Cheating disciples with the promise of salvation while not being able to deliver salvation is neither karma, nor karma sannyas, nor karma yoga. The karma yogi is transcendental, the karma sannyasi is sattvic, the karmi is rajasic, and a cheater is tamasic. As we have discussed in earlier videos, all of these are similar in some ways and different in other ways. Those who look for similarity and not difference are cheated, just like those who look for similarity between rope and snake find some similarity, but because they ignore the differences, they equate the rope to a snake, and by that false equivalence, they are cheated. In the next verse, Krishna talks about the duality of hate and desire. This hate and desire is caused by the three guna of Prakriti. As we have discussed earlier, each guna is opposed to the other guna in some ways and similar to the other guna in other ways. Due to the similarity, there is attraction, and due to dissimilarity, there is revulsion. However, each guna is also incomplete because it lacks the traits of the other guna. So when we realize the incompleteness of one guna, then we are attracted toward the other guna. For example, a lazy person is naturally attracted to comfort. But then he may realize that he cannot eat by being lazy. And so he has to work, which is opposed to his laziness. But it is required by the deficiency of being lazy. When a lazy person works, there is constant turmoil within that person between the emotional nature of laziness and the intellectually recognized deficiency of laziness. This turmoil is an example of the duality. Modern science has no understanding of duality. This is why Newton made the first law of motion, where he said that a body pushed by external force will keep moving in the direction of the force unless impeded by another force. It means that a man lounging on the sofa has to be scolded by his wife to get up and work because otherwise he will have no realization of his own hunger. And so, ever since Newton, science has been constructing an externalist model of causality because there is no mind, no desire, no hunger or thirst in the body. This was Aristotle's idea of the world as well. He said that one thing pushes another thing, which then pushes yet another thing, and this chain of pushing must have begun at some point during the origin of the universe. And he called the original cause of pushing the world into motion the unmoved mover, which Newton and others interpreted as God. So Aristotle made the world a chain of falling dominoes, and God the finger that pushes the first domino. There is no choice in a person, there is no conflict within a person, and no choice to resolve that conflict. This idea of dominoes falling upon other dominoes appears in monotheistic religions as well, where there is an original sinner whose sin is inherited by their children and they all become sinners. Thus, people today did not choose to become sinners. It was one domino falling upon another domino, and thus the original sin became the later sin. And since God pushed the original domino, therefore God must be responsible for the chain of falling dominoes. Then God must also save people from sin without the people becoming sinless, because their sinfulness is a chain of falling dominoes set into motion by God. The same idea of falling dominoes appears in Newton's mechanics, which is why Newton called these dominoes inertial objects. One object pushes another object, which pushes yet another object, and so on. There is no desire or revulsion. There is no inner conflict between various conflicting natures such as laziness and hunger, and there is no choice. This ideology of modeling reality as inert objects is the result of the depersonalization of reality in Western philosophy, monotheism, and modern science. But this is not truth, reality, or science. The reality is Prakriti, comprising varied combinations of the three guna. Each guna has some pros and some cons. And so the combination of the guna also has some pros and cons. Then the person covered by these guna is pulled by the pros and pushed by the cons. And thus, this push and pull residing in each person due to their guna is called duality. It is like an accelerator and brake in each car. Then there is a driver who presses the accelerator or brake. The engine driving this car is the desire for pleasure and the aversion for pain. The steering in the car is the rationality of how to get pleasure and avoid pain. And the brake and accelerator are the actions that will produce pleasure and avoid pain. Finally, there is a driver controlling the engine, steering, accelerator, and brake. So the entire causal model is internal rather than external. Even the external things we see are the result of previous choices the driver has made to press the brake or accelerator, turn the steering, and stop or start the engine, which takes him to different places. So external reality is an effect of internal reality. This is the alternative scientific model of personalization of reality, in which there is a car, passenger, desires, aversions, conflicts, and their resolution by choice. Now, the problem is that the driver can be motivated either by the destination to which he is going or by the quality of his journey. Those who focus on the destination will choose the road to the destination without worrying about whether the road is crowded or empty, whether it is lighted or dark, whether it is smooth or rough, whether it is long or short. Meanwhile, someone who doesn't care about the destination will choose a crowded or empty road, a lighted or dark road, a smooth or rough road, and a long or short road based on his preference for the quality of the journey rather than the preference for the destination. In the same way, based on the three guna, a person chooses a road based on the quality of journey rather than the destination. However, a transcendentalist chooses a road based on the destination rather than the quality of journey. For the transcendentalist, the right road is that which takes him to the destination, whether or not it is crowded or empty, lighted or dark, smooth or rough, long or short. This is freedom from duality, because the goal is one, and yet to stay on the right road, one must be able to tolerate a road that is crowded or empty, lighted or dark, smooth or rough, long or short, which is freedom from duality. And so Krishna asks Arjun to become free of the duality and the result of his activities. Many people misunderstand this to mean that there is no ultimate goal of life, that one should just live out their life driving on whatever road they are driving on, because these roads go nowhere. For them, the fun is in the journey and not the destination. This is a false interpretation of Karma Yoga, because if everyone goes on whichever road they want, then there can be no conception of right and wrong, or dharma and adharma, or greater good and lesser good. The correct interpretation is that there is a right path, the dharmic path, the path of greater good. But this path may be difficult, lonely, dark, long, rough, and empty. One has to learn to tolerate the difficulties of the journey to the right destination. And so, duality refers to the comfort and discomfort of the path, and non duality refers to the singular and ultimate goal of life. The path may get harder or easier, but the ultimate goal of life doesn't change. So, those on the path to the ultimate goal of life learn to tolerate the comfort and discomfort caused by the path, rather than think that these paths go nowhere. So, any path is equally good, or choose a path that is comfortable to them based on their nature of three qualities, or simply stand in one place and take no path at all, or keep changing the path based on whatever seems convenient for the present moment, and so on. All these things require us to understand that there is a duality of desire and aversion in us, and that we are not simply pushed like so many falling dominoes. Then it requires us to understand that these desires and aversions are about the quality of the road and not the destination. And finally, there is an ultimate destination of life. One who knows and becomes fixed on the ultimate destination becomes a non dualist, and one who keeps focusing on the quality of the road remains a dualist. Over the last few thousand years, the world has seen the problems of blind faith religions, devoid of scientific knowledge of the self, the world, and God. These blind faith religions equated the world to inert substance rather than living persons, to create a blind faith in materialism. Then these blind faith religions removed demigods governing the world to replace morality with ethics, which means substitute universal principles of truthfulness, kindness, charity, and purity with man made contracts with God to create blind faith in man made laws. Finally, these blind faith religions replaced spiritual bliss with material pleasure and rationalized stealing, killing, and lying for gaining control over land and resources as the work of God to create blind faith in life being consumerism. All these blind faith ideologies separated science from religion, mind from body, and the individual from society to propagate materialism, immorality, and hedonism as religion. This is what the Bhagavad Purana calls Kaitava Dharma, or cheating religion. The cheating begins with the replacement of scientific inquiry with blind faith. Whenever faith replaces knowing, the result is materialism, immorality, and hedonism. Then one might work, but it is sinful activity. Then one might read scripture, but it is all fabrications and fictions. Then one might enjoy, but it is the pursuit of pleasure devoid of peace, satisfaction, and fulfillment. And so Prabhupada used to say that religion without philosophy is sentiment or sometimes fanaticism, while philosophy without religion is mental speculation. If we restore philosophy and religion to each other, then the separation of science and religion, mind and body, and the individual and society would disappear, which would put an end to blind faith religions. Therefore, anyone who equates all religions is living in the blind faith religion and isn't prepared to take a rational, scientific, and philosophical approach to life. He would rather believe that a miracle would make him go to heaven than ask questions and break that illusion. Blind faith religions talk about loving God without knowing God, doing rituals without knowing why a ritual is done, converting others without clearing one's own doubts, and trying to change the world without truly changing oneself. In the last video, we talked about blind ritualization of the Vedic tradition and discussed its outcomes. That various kinds of misconceptions, falsehoods, and deviations appear over successive generations, destroy the deep reality while preserving the shallow appearances. These shallow appearances are sometimes called prakrit sahajya. It means doing whatever seems comfortable and convenient. Since there are infinite ideas of comfortable and convenient, whenever this approach is adopted, the tradition splits into dozens of conflicting, deviant, and speculative sects, exactly like the blind faith religions have split into dozens of conflicting sects over the centuries. Scientific knowledge unites and blind faith divides. Scientific knowledge takes us to truth, virtue, and bliss, and blind faith takes us away from it. Therefore, blind faith always gives birth to Kaitav Dharma or cheating religions. And so, Krishna talks about the integration of karma and jnana. We must know what God is before we try to love Him. We must do rituals after knowing why they are done. We must convert others after becoming convinced. We must try to transform the world after transforming our lives. Factually, it is impossible to know God and not love Him. It is impossible to know why rituals are done and not do them oneself. When we are convinced and our lives are transformed, the chances of bringing the same conviction and transformation to others are infinitely greater. Conversely, those who love God selflessly also come to know Him. Those who do rituals with conviction also understand why they are done. And then they can teach about God and rituals to others. However, in a good age, most people are selfless and convinced about yoga and yajna due to their previous life activities. And in a bad age, such as Kali Yuga, most people are selfish and not convinced about yoga and yajna due to their previous life activities. Those born and raised in the Vedic culture are selfless and convinced from childhood due to their earlier lives, and they can get knowledge by focusing on activity instead of focusing on knowledge. But that is literally nobody at present. The common case is doubt and selfishness, which shows up in the inconsistent and impersistent performance of activities. To become consistent and persistent, we need the conviction that yoga and yajna is the best thing to do, and everything other than yoga and yajna is a waste of life. To develop that conviction, we pursue knowledge. So when Krishna says Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga produce the same results and both are on the same level, he is not talking about everyone. He is saying that those who can act selflessly will gain knowledge, and those who have knowledge will act selflessly. These two categories don't include the vast majority of people at present who are both ignorant and selfish, and put on an appearance of holy men to deceive others. Anyone who is not able to perfect either path or runs a risk of being deceived by pretentious holy men should pursue a combination of both knowledge and action. That means validate all claims of knowledge as far as possible by reason, and when you can't validate any claim by reasoning, then validate if a person practices what he preaches. Conversely, check if all the actions are selfless sacrifices, and when you cannot validate if some action is a selfless sacrifice, then check if a person preaches what he practices. When both paths are used, deceit of pretenders is caught quickly. When one path is used, deceit is caught slowly but eventually. When both paths are ignored, deceit is never caught. Thus, we can state some thumb rules about yoga paths. First, each yoga path is sufficient if we can perfect it. Second, if we can't perfect a yoga path, then a combination of yoga paths is sufficient. Third, to avoid being cheated by pretenders, a combination of yoga paths is necessary. And so most acharyas prescribe a combination of yoga paths, such as studying Vedic texts or jnana, doing some work according to one's nature or karma, doing introspection and self-reflection or dhyana, chanting mantras and doing deity worship or bhakti, and doing everything within one's ability to spread dharma and destroy adharma. One might ask, why do acharyas give a combination of many paths when Krishna says just one path is sufficient, and by one path the results of other paths are achieved? The answer is that we are not able to perfect one path in isolation. So a combination of paths is prescribed. Also, because most people are easily cheated by pretenders, a combination of paths is necessary. Therefore, Acharya teachings are not contradictory to what Krishna says here. But most people cannot do what Krishna says here, namely, being able to fully apply oneself to just one path. And so, a combination of paths becomes necessary and sufficient. Historically, there has been a great tension between two effects of genuine knowledge. First, even ordinary people can see that the world brings misery of disease, poverty, old age, war, and death. And so those who examine the human condition quickly conclude that this is not perfect life and may decide to renounce the world. Second, even ordinary people can see that if everyone renounced the world, then nobody will survive because there will be no food to eat, no clothes to wear, no home to live, and life will get harder than disease, poverty, old age, war, and death. And so an examination of the human condition leads to a tension between short term and long term. Should we undergo extreme suffering now for eternal happiness, or reduce suffering now to forever live in misery? This dilemma between engagement and renunciation is a false binary. It was in recent times advocated by many impersonalists who stated that the world is false, immoral, and miserable, so we must renounce it. But renunciation of duty and responsibility actually led to even greater misery, immorality, and falsehood rather than the expectation. The actual solution is a gradual and progressive substitution of material activities with spiritual activities. The world is neither true nor false by itself. It is neither miserable nor happy by itself. It is neither moral or immoral by itself. Rather, we create falsehood, immorality, and misery by our choices, and we can change it into truth, morality, and happiness by our choices. Designating the whole world as falsehood, immorality, and misery is rejection of choice. And accepting the whole world as truth, morality, and happiness is counterfactual. The world is not deterministically one thing or the other thing due to the possibility of choice. And so the solution to the problem of the world is not the world, but our choice. We can be happy, truthful, and moral in this world by our choice, and we can be miserable, deceived, and immoral in this world by our choice. Don't blame the world, just blame yourself for your choices. This is the real solution. So, when we blame ourselves for our choices rather than the world, then we have to ask, what is the best choice? The answer is stop bad choices and start good choices. Just stopping bad choices is not enough. We have to also make good choices because stopping all choices to become choiceless is just a figment of imagination. And so Krishna says that one who renounces the false world but doesn't unite with the eternal truth of the Supreme Lord through yoga doesn't become happy. Similarly, one who remains entangled in the false world doesn't become happy. Therefore, the prescription is to renounce the falsehood and take to the truth. Everything in the world is not false. If that were the case, then there would be no Vedic texts, no deities, no mantras, no meditation, no duties and responsibilities, and no concept of dharma and adharma in this world. The claim that the whole world is false entails that even that claim about the world must be false, because the claim of the world being false exists in the world. And so, when the whole world is false, then even the claim of the world being false must be false. To escape this self contradiction, we must accept the possibility of truth, morality, and bliss in this world, along with the existence of falsehood, immorality, and misery. Then we can choose truth, morality, and bliss and reject falsehood, immorality, and misery. That gradual and progressive choice would be the renunciation of falsehood, immorality, and misery, and engagement with truth, morality, and bliss. So the false binary of engagement versus renunciation would be rejected. History shows us that if the world is called false, immoral, and miserable, the result is not truth, morality, and happiness, but even greater falsehood, immorality, and misery. Thus, all Vaishnavacharyas rejected the impersonalist claim that the whole world is false, immoral, and miserable, which, as we saw, is also self contradictory. Instead, Vaishnavacharyas advocated a progressive renunciation of falsehood, immorality, and misery, and a progressive engagement with truth, morality, and bliss. That teaching exactly aligns with Krishna's statement that mere renunciation without engagement doesn't make one happy. But engagement with the truth, morality, and bliss detaches one from the falsehood, immorality, and misery. And then one achieves the supreme destination without delay. In one sense, a transcendentalist has no friends or enemies. By friend, I mean someone we depend on or someone we need. A transcendentalist depends on no one and needs no one. He just depends on Krishna and needs Krishna. And if Krishna sends someone favorable, he is accepted as a friend. But if that person goes away, he is not hated, because hate would arise only if the transcendentalist depended on him. Similarly, a transcendentalist has no enemies, because he knows that everyone is a part of Krishna. And so, even if he is temporarily acting inimical, it is due to ignorance. But if that person will be educated, then he will not be inimical. So, just like a parent tolerates the tantrums of an ignorant child, similarly, a transcendentalist tolerates personal insults of the ignorant people. However, a transcendentalist never tolerates an insult to Krishna or his pure devotees. That is because the transcendentalist is not devoid of emotions, love, relationship, attachment, or affection. There is a strong attachment to Krishna and his pure devotees, but neither attachment nor aversion to those who come and go, or praise and attack, reward or punish him personally. And so a transcendentalist tolerates personal insults, but not insults to Krishna or his devotees. For insults toward his deeply loved Lord and his devotees, the transcendentalist is hot as fire, but for personal insults towards him, he is cold as ice. Krishna demonstrated both these natures when he tolerated 100 insults from Shishupal and then beheaded him. On his own account, Krishna can tolerate infinite insults, but these insults pain his devotees. So to please his devotees, Krishna beheaded Shishupal. Likewise, even devotees tolerate many insults, but excessive tolerance pains Krishna. So to please Krishna, the devotees attack those who insult them, just to please Krishna. In this way, there is both tolerance and intolerance, and neither is universalized. If tolerance was the only thing, then Krishna would not ask Arjun to fight the Mahabharata war. And if intolerance was the only thing, then Krishna would not try to negotiate peace before war. So tolerance exists within limits, and intolerance also exists, but within limits. And so one might ask, what are these limits? And the answer is that when the greater good is hurt, there is no tolerance. But if only personal good is hurt, then there is tolerance. So, for example, devotees accept hardship to teach the message of Krishna. But that doesn't mean they will not stop someone mortally threatening their lives. Because the greater good is that the message of Krishna is known, even if that means through hardship. And the greater good is that the propagator of the greater good remains alive to keep propagating the greater good. Likewise, sometimes for the greater good, we may maintain silence, and sometimes for the greater good, one may speak vociferously. All confusions like acting within limits or acting in different ways are resolved by knowing the greater good. When someone acts for the greatest good, he becomes Sarva Bhutatma Bhutatma, which means the life of all living entities. Just like in our body, the hand acts for the benefit of the whole body. And even if sometimes the hand slaps some part of the body to shoo away a mosquito or scratches the body to relieve an itch, it is for the body's benefit. Similarly, the devotee is like the hand in the body, acting for the benefit of the whole body. The impersonalists do not understand this principle because for them one must separate oneself from the entanglement of this world, which is like a hand cutting itself off from the body. So such a person is an individualist rather than a collectivist. The Sarva Bhutatma Bhutatma is a hand joined to the body, and the individualist is a hand cut off from the body. Now, one might say that this hand joined to the body is actually entangled in the body, so he must be bound instead of liberated. But Krishna rejects that. He says, Kurvannapi na lipyate, which means even though he acts, he is not attached, bound, or entangled. And so one might ask how that is possible. And the answer is that the yogi is not serving the stomach, legs, or head, but the soul in the body. For example, he can even do surgery on some body part because that is beneficial to the soul and the whole body, even if the part undergoing surgery may feel pain. And so the hand is not truly attached to any body part, and yet it is attached to the whole. Prabhupada used to summarize this simply by saying, service to God is service to man, but service to man is not service to God. We don't want to keep putting band-aid on an infected body part and call that service to that body part. Sometimes we may have to surgically cut out that body part to serve the soul. And so the devotees of Krishna are ready to cut the infected part to heal the body, while the impersonalists keep trying to apply band-aid on the infected part. Similarly, Krishna uses three words, Vishuddhatma, Vijitatma, Jitendriya, which means pure soul, a soul who has conquered himself, and a soul who controls his senses. An impure soul acts impulsively under the control of his senses and then regrets after realizing his mistakes. But a pure soul acts in full consciousness and doesn't regret because he knows that he is working for Krishna and the greatest good. And so, as time passes, the mind of the impure soul is filled with regrets, guilt, shame, and complaints. But the mind of the pure soul is free of these. Then an impure soul does many things to compensate for guilts, regrets, shames, and complaints, but the pure soul does not. For example, after the Mahabharata war, Yudhishthir became depressed because of killing so many people and refused to ascend to the throne. But Arjun was not depressed. So Krishna asked Yudhishthir to learn from Bhishma and other saintly persons and then do his duty. The reason is that in the material world, many seemingly bad things have to be done for the greater good, which should not be regretted. But one who is thinking of a narrow good rather than the greater good often regrets them. That narrowing of the conception of goodness is impurity, which culminates in individualism. But even if someone is compassionate, his compassion may be limited to a narrow good rather than the greatest good, and so he may regret his actions. The referee in a football match doesn't play football, but the football match cannot be played until the referee blows his whistle. The umpire in a tennis match doesn't play tennis, but the tennis match cannot be played until the umpire says play. The arbiter in a chess game doesn't play chess, but the chess game doesn't begin until the arbiter says so. Therefore, the football referee, the tennis umpire, and the chess arbiter is not affected by whichever side wins. Generally, referees, umpires, and arbiters are chosen from neutral places so that they would remain impartial. And yet, they must be present for the games to be played. In the same way, a liberated soul is an umpire, referee, and arbiter between two parties. One party is the senses, and the other party is the sense objects. On some occasions, the sense objects win as they constrain, limit, and conform the senses to their constraints. On other occasions, the senses win as they change the sense objects to conform to the demands of the senses. And so the senses and the sense objects are the two parties engaged in a game of winning over each other, with different sides winning in different ways. Meanwhile, the liberated soul is the referee, umpire, and arbiter watching the match between the senses and the sense objects. He is neutral and impartial, which means he doesn't care which side wins. He just ensures that the game is played according to the rules. The rule-based game is a moral life. The Ishvara is the umpire of the worldly game. He doesn't care who wins, but the game must be played according to the rules. And so the Ishvara teaches everyone how to lead a moral life if they want to play this worldly game. But if someone wants to play with the Lord, that's another matter. And so someone with a divine consciousness takes the mood of the Ishvara. By that he doesn't become Ishvara, but he takes the same mood. And in that mood, he watches the interaction between the senses and the sense objects, like a referee, umpire, or arbiter watches a game and ensures that it is played by the rules. Meanwhile, one without this divine consciousness identifies with the senses and feels excited by fulfillment and frustrated by unfulfillment. And so Krishna tells Arjuna to live in this world just like he lives. That means play the game of the material world according to the rules, but don't worry about victory or defeat. This sense and sense object interaction is called the interplay of Shakti and Shiva in the Tantra texts. Shiva and Shakti are playing with each other, and the senses are part of Shakti and the sense objects are part of Shiva. So it looks like we are part of this cosmic play, although the soul or Jiva is not a part of Shiva or Shakti. But by identifying with different parts of Shiva and Shakti, the soul falsely believes that its senses are doing something with the sense objects or vice versa, when actually Shiva and Shakti are playing with each other. And so the divine consciousness knows that it is neither the senses nor the sense objects, and they are just playing with each other, but he is separate from both. And yet, he cannot quit the play. He has to participate in the game like a referee, umpire, or arbiter. One might wonder why the Vedic texts emphasize detachment so much, even while living in the material world. They might ask, how can a person truly act in this world if he is detached? And why should a person be detached? The answer is that attachment produces karma, while detachment doesn't produce karma. Karma then leads to bondage, which means repeated birth and death. And if we want to be free of this cycle of birth and death, we must act in this world detached. And so we cannot understand the emphasis on detachment unless we understand how karma is created and how it binds us to the cycle of rebirth. This topic is not discussed in the Bhagavad-Gita, although Krishna repeatedly talks about detachment, which probably means that Arjun already knew this topic. But since most of us might not, so let's spend some time discussing how karma is created as a result of attachment and how karma is not created as a result of detachment. The basic question in each person is, who am I? The world answers this question by saying that you are a man or woman, young or old, parent or child, husband or wife, rich or poor, powerful or weak, intelligent or stupid, and so on. When a person believes the answer, it's called attachment. And when someone doesn't believe the answer, it is called detachment. As we believe the answer, we are pleased by some answers and displeased by other answers. Then we try to maintain the pleasing answer and change the displeasing answer, and that creates the cycle of birth and death. But if we did not believe the answer, then it won't please or displease us, and that ends the cycle of birth and death. Thus, there is a difference between detachment and escapism. An escapist believes that he is a man or woman, young or old, parent or child, husband or wife, rich or poor, powerful or weak, intelligent or stupid. But he doesn't like what he is, and he tries to escape his displeasure by rejecting his duties. But a truly renounced person doesn't believe that he is a man or woman, young or old, parent or child, husband or wife, rich or poor, powerful or weak, intelligent or stupid. So he never tries to escape his life but keeps doing his moral duty. An easy example is that a person frustrated in their marriage leaves home and takes sannyas. Later on, he finds a compatible partner and gets married again. So his earlier sannyas was not detachment but escapism. A truly detached person never leaves the marriage, or if he leaves, then he never looks for a compatible partner and never gets married again. So Krishna advises Arjun to be like a lotus leaf untouched by water. It means, for example, that even if you are frustrated in an incompatible marriage, don't become a sannyasi out of frustration. Rather, try to realize that you are not husband or wife. So the question of compatible marriage doesn't arise. Then do your duty as a husband or wife. That is because if you become a sannyasi out of frustration, you will again look for a compatible partner and renounce the earlier renunciation. This renunciation out of frustration is called Markat Vairagya, which means a monkey saying that the grapes are sour. The monkey doesn't stop looking for grapes after saying that the grapes are sour. So that is not true detachment. Genuine detachment would be if a monkey doesn't care if he gets grapes or not. And so a monkey who says grapes are sour but keeps looking for grapes stays in the cycle of birth and death. But a monkey who doesn't care escapes this cycle. Now, Buddhists believe that to get out of this cycle of birth and death, we have to stop trying to know the self. For them, detachment means the end of asking, "Who am I?" But that also means there is no truth and there is nothing to be known. This position is called Shunyavad or emptiness and nothingness. Then there is a position that says that the world offers us no answers and all the answers lie within each person. So instead of asking "Who am I?" to the world, ask yourself all the questions. But when you turn inward to ask questions, the world ceases to exist and only the self exists. Moreover, once the self turns inward to ask, "Who am I?" he gets no answer other than "I exist," because the answer to "Who am I?" requires a world which doesn't exist. As we have discussed earlier, our identity is socially constructed, which requires a world other than us. If we reject the world, then we also lose the socially constructed identity. This position is called Nirvishesha, or the absence of individuals other than me. Me being the only existence, and so there is no answer to "Who am I?" even though the individual I exists. Nirvishesha and Shunyavad don't answer the question "Who am I?" And so the person eventually falls into the material realm to find an answer and then goes through never ending dissatisfying answers. That is because the actual answer is in relation to Krishna and his devotees. Our identity is socially constructed, so we need a world to know who I am. But that world is not the material world. In the material world, everyone seeks to know themselves without worrying about others. So when others ask, "Who am I?" everyone gives a dissatisfying answer. Then when we ask "Who I am?" they too get a dissatisfying answer. That is because all these questions and answers are being asked devoid of their relation to Krishna and his devotees. And so, even as the question is genuine, the answers are not. Thus, the real prescription to get out of the cycle of birth and death is to detach oneself from worldly people and attach oneself to Krishna and his devotees. Then we act in this world like Krishna and his devotees, which means we reject all the material answers and accept all the spiritual answers. Krishna is never inactive, so we can't be inactive. Krishna acts for the greatest good, so the devotees act for the greatest good. This is the combination of detachment and attachment. Pure detachment doesn't answer the question, who am I? Although it purges false answers to that question. To find the true answer, one has to act in relationship to Krishna and his devotees. And so, one who doesn't believe the worldly answers isn't disturbed by them, whether flattering or unflattering. Worldly wealth or poverty, respect or disrespect, fame or ignominy, health or sickness, friendship or loneliness are equally false answers to who am I. But working for Krishna and his devotees is the actual wealth, respect, fame, health, and friendship. And so, if there was no spiritual world, there would be no answer to who am I. One would have to be satisfied with the answer that I don't exist, or I exist but I am nobody. The spiritual world answers the question, who am I? Therefore, Krishna says to Arjun that the steadily devoted soul offers the results of all activities to me, and he is in peace because he is free from the results of his activities. Meanwhile, a greedy person works for himself and sometimes renounces the work like a monkey, calling the grapes sour, but then again goes looking for grapes. This monkey renunciation sometimes looks like liberation, but eventually a person falls back into entanglement of birth and death again. In these verses, Krishna describes the body as a city with 9 gates, which means there is a citizen separate from the city, and the citizen goes in and out of the city through 9 gates. These 9 gates are the 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, 2 ears, 1 mouth, the anus, and the genitals. Our consciousness moves in and out through these gates. This is a complete contrast to the modern materialistic idea that the soul is bound to the body, so there is a city without a citizen. Some Western thinkers coined the term ghost in a machine to critique the Cartesian mind-body dualism. For them, there is a machine and the soul is a ghost, which means some primitive, unscientific people talk about a soul, but there are no ghosts to be seen, so these claims are just imagination. However, even these people cannot equate pain with pleasure, and the fact is that a machine doesn't feel any pain or pleasure, and doesn't demand pleasure or complain about pain. So if we are machines, then pain and pleasure must not exist, which is false. Thus, calling a soul a non-existing soul is just hypocrisy. A lot of intellectual jugglery is done to justify this hypocrisy, but it never succeeds because a machine never complains about pain and never seeks pleasure, while a human does. In this regard, we must understand the difference between happiness and pleasure, distress and pain. Happiness is a state of mental fulfillment where one needs nothing other than the self. Distress is a state of mental unfulfillment where one needs something other than the self. Seeking something other than the self, one searches for other things than the self. And that is the citizen going out of the city of 9 gates. Outside the city, he finds something and brings it back in and enjoys sense pleasure for some time. In that state of pleasure, there is mental fulfillment, which is called happiness. But this happiness depends on something other than the self, so it doesn't last long. Again, the citizen goes out of the city to get something else, and this time either he doesn't find anything or brings in something painful. Then he feels mental distress. And so, anyone whose happiness depends on something other than the self cycles between happiness and distress. But a self-satisfied person doesn't need to go out of the city to find pleasure or happiness because his happiness doesn't depend on something other than the self. So now comes the question of how karma is created. Karma is created due to individualism. For example, when a parent rewards or punishes a child purely for the benefit of the child, there is no karma because the parent is unselfish. However, if the parent is selfish, then he or she might reward or punish the child too much, expecting their personal gain through that reward or punishment. And that excessive action born out of selfish interest of individualism creates karma. Similarly, sometimes parent may not punish the child at all, thinking about their selfish gain or loss. And again, that selfish action creates karma. And so both excessive action and neglect of action while thinking about selfish gain or loss creates karma. Meanwhile, unselfish action doesn't create karma. Additionally, this selfish action is caused by material nature because material nature is always incomplete and it makes the soul feel incomplete and then forces the soul to act. But one who has given up this material nature doesn't feel incomplete and then he doesn't act to overcome the incompleteness of the material nature. Based on this, we can understand why Krishna says that the liberated soul doesn't create karma, nor does he induce others to create karma. The reason is that karma is created when we are selfish, and we become selfish due to association with material nature. Similarly, Krishna says, Na karma phala sanyogam, which means an unselfish person doesn't unite with the results of his activities, which means he is not excited if the results are good and not depressed if the results are bad. That is because work is done unselfishly for the greatest good, and if the results are good, then it is good, and if the results are bad, then it is not bad. As we have discussed, the results of our actions are not always good because we are not the only actors. But a person trying to do the greatest good doesn't consider inadequate or bad results a bad outcome because not doing those actions would have produced even worse results. Just like a parent may scold a child to improve it, and the child may retaliate in anger. So the outcome is inadequate or bad. But not scolding the child would have meant condoning and allowing the bad deeds, which is even worse. Generally, when a parent acts in the child's best interest, the child later realizes that the scolding was necessary, and even if good results are not seen immediately, they are seen eventually. Meanwhile, a parent too scared to scold, fearing retaliation, would make things even worse. And so, Krishna says multiple things in a single verse. First, karma is created if we act selfishly due to the incompleteness created by material guna. Second, a person who transcends these guna doesn't himself create karma, nor does he induce others to create karma. Third, such a person accepts good and bad outcomes of their actions equally because if the outcome is good, then it is good, but even if it is bad, it is still better than what it would be without the action. We can apply this to the Mahabharata war. Let's say Arjun fought the war and was defeated in it. Even then, he would have killed a few demonic rulers, which is a better outcome than not fighting the war and allowing all those demonic rulers to thrive. So even defeat is better than inaction, and victory is certainly better than defeat. Knowing this, one who has transcended the guna considers action for the greatest good a better state than inaction. Meanwhile, one who acts for selfish gain and loss always produces a worse result. For example, he may kill unnecessarily or not do the necessary killing, and the outcome of both is worse. Likewise, running away from necessary killing also produces a worse outcome. In both cases, karma is created because action or inaction are caused by material guna. In several earlier videos, we have discussed why the central problem of material existence is individualism, and the solution to all these problems is collectivism. Krishna is the complete whole and everything else is a part. So, when the part works for the whole, that is working for Krishna and the collective good. But an individualist acts for his good based on his conception of good produced from the inadequacy caused by material nature. But one who loses this inadequacy acts for the greatest good. Similarly, we discussed in previous verses how karma is created by selfish action, but no karma is created by acting for the greatest good. And thus, anyone doing good or bad deeds selfishly is caught in the cycle of birth and death, and anyone acting unselfishly is liberated from this cycle. So now Krishna says he doesn't create good or bad karma, nor does he take anyone's good or bad karma, which means he never induces anyone to act in a selfish manner. That is because, as Krishna says, the idea of individualism or separateness of the part from the whole is simply ignorance. Under this ignorance, foolish people think that Krishna sometimes lies or cheats or kills, so he must be acting immorally because they apply their own individualism to Krishna. So they think that just like they lie, cheat, or kill out of selfishness, so when Krishna lies, cheats, or kills, then he too must be acting selfishly. And thus many fools start applying moral standards to Krishna because they have no idea that morality means acting for the greatest good, and sometimes we have to lie, cheat, and kill for the greatest good. And that is itself the definition of morality, not immorality. There is no other definition of morality, and every other definition is immoral. Sin and piety are created by selfishness. For instance, someone can give money in charity hoping to get many times more money in the future, and this is piety. Likewise, someone can take money thinking that he would not have to repay, and this is sin. The pious person gives money expecting money, and he gets it in the future. The sinful person takes money thinking that it would never be taken from him in the future. Both create karma, which binds the person to the cycle of birth and death. In contrast, one who acts unselfishly for the greatest good has no sin or piety, and consequently he is liberated from the cycle of birth and death. But unfortunately, most people have no theory of moral action, and they have substituted morals with laws. For example, a law may say that nobody should lie, cheat, or kill. But that means we should be truthful to the liar, honest with the cheater, and compassionate with the killer. What does that achieve? Well, it encourages the liar to lie more, the cheater to cheat more, and the killer to kill more. And so, simply by following laws, we increase lies, cheating, and killing. Lawmaking is the ideology of those who can't think or don't want to think of the consequences of their actions. Factually, all these laws were originally created by criminals in political power who wanted ordinary people to follow the law, and they built escape hatches for their criminal friends in political power. However, Krishna's morality is not laws. Krishna's morality is tit for tat. And as we have discussed, by this tit for tat action, Krishna brings everyone to the truth, morality, and bliss. Even lying, cheating, and killing are greatest good in some cases. And when they are the greatest good, they are considered morality, not immorality. One who does this greatest good is moral, and anyone who creates laws is immoral because he applies the same yardstick to the honest and the criminal. These law creating societies have neither had a theory of morality, nor any understanding of God, nor any conception of acting for the greatest good. And so, anyone who accuses Krishna of immorality when he lies, cheats, or kills should be asked a simple question: where is your theory of morality? Actually, we don't need a theory of morality if we know that Krishna is the whole and we are the parts, and the whole always acts unselfishly, but the part in the material world acts selfishly due to ignorance of being separated from the whole. Krishna compares this ignorance to darkness and knowledge to the sun. Just like in a dark room we cannot see anything, but we know of our existence from within. Similarly, under ignorance, each person's focus is their selfish interest and not the collective interest. But when the sun comes out, then everything is seen, and then by seeing the complete truth, the selfishness created by ignorance ends. Finally, Krishna says that one whose mind, intelligence, trust, and refuge are illuminated by the sunlight of something beyond sin and piety is fully cleansed of all karmic contamination and proceeds to liberation. We have to note the four successive levels called mind, intelligence, trust, and refuge. At the level of the mind, we can talk about the theory of morality, and after some time, people will forget about it and act selfishly, even though they heard about the theory. Then, at the level of the intellect, it becomes a belief, which means that one almost never acts immorally. And yet, even in this stage, a person may doubt if morality will actually help him get liberated, and he might be occasionally tempted to be immoral. To go past this stage, one has to become convinced that moral action is good for me. But even then, one worries about what others think about him and may start doing as they do just to please them. And so, in the final stage of refuge, the conviction is so great that one doesn't care about other people's thinking because he is convinced that there is nothing better, so there is no point in worrying about it. The very advanced soul thus quickly dismisses anything that is not Krishna Bhakti. It may not be totally evil, but one who is convinced knows that there is nothing better than Krishna Bhakti. So, what is the point of entertaining something inferior? Such a person is called Uttama Adhikari. But if we outright reject all lower types of ideologies, then most people are offended. They don't analyze the merit of the arguments because they assign the highest priority to their emotions. And so, to teach these unconvinced people, one has to be a Madhyamadhikari, which means conditionally accept something lower but point out the higher. Finally, there is a Kanishtadhikari who doesn't even know what is higher or lower and therefore adopts liberalism, which means my opinion is as good as yours and they are just your opinions, so we should respect each other's opinions. A Kanishtha lacks all the four stages of mind, intellect, trust, and refuge mentioned by Krishna above. He doesn't even have a theory of moral action, so we can forget about the intellectual conviction in its truth, the emotional trust that this is perfect for me, and then the final surrender in which there is nothing else. Nearly everyone going around as a preacher these days is a Kanishtha, which means that they don't even have a theory of moral action. So, to cover up their own ignorance, they become liberals and demand tolerance of various types of falsehoods. In the next two verses, Krishna talks about Samadarshina, or those who see with an equal vision. Many people interpret Samadarshina as equality, which begs the question, if Krishna advocates seeing everything with equality, then why would he distinguish between the Pandava side in the war against the Kaurava side? In fact, if both Pandavas and Kauravas are equal, then why should there be war between the two? Answer is that equal vision is not the same as equality. Factually, everything in the universe is unique because each thing is a unique combination of the three guna. Therefore, no two apples are alike, no two oranges are alike, no two humans are alike, no two places are alike, and no two times are alike. Every time, place, situation, person, and thing is unique, not just in the material world, but also in the spiritual world. No two souls are the same because each soul is a part of Krishna, and if any two parts were the same, they would not be distinct parts. Therefore, nothing in the material or the spiritual world is the same, equal, or identical. Rather, everything is unique. This uniqueness is called Vishishta in Sanskrit. But because there are infinite unique parts of one whole, therefore Ramanujacharya called infinite parts of one whole Vishishta Advaita. In contrast, Western thinking imagines that all of reality comprises identical entities. For example, since the very beginning, modern science has been trying to reduce all reality to one kind of particle, interacting by one kind of force, governed by one kind of law, because Western thinking imagines that reality is uniform, and whatever appears to be unique is either an illusion or an aberration. This is because during Greek times, philosophers imagined that everything had only one ideal form in heaven and everything on the earth was an imperfect imitation of that perfect form. For example, all ideal humans must have the same shape, size, color, height, weight, and so on, and anything different from that must be non-ideal. Thus, to proclaim that white men are ideal, every other skin color had to be non-ideal. Even in religion, everyone has to follow one prophet, one book, one method, one path, one law, and one king, because everything else would be non-ideal. And so, Western philosophy, science, and religion are all rooted in the idea of uniformity. As a result, only one sect of one religion could be true and all else must be heresies. Only one culture, civilization, and country could be perfect and everything else must be deviant, imperfect, and flawed. Only one gender could be ideal and the other gender must be non-ideal. This ideology of uniformity and universalism is factually the root of all wars, conflicts, and problems today. Because under this ideology, everyone declares themselves to be the perfect and ideal without proof and tries to oppress, suppress, and destroy everything else. In contrast, the Vedic tradition sees everything as a unique type of thing. And yet, all these unique things are part of one whole. Just like our hands are not the same as the legs, or the eyes are not the same as the ears, or the heart is not the same as the lungs. And yet, every part is perfect and ideal in its own place. Similarly, ideality or perfection has a contextual rather than a universal definition in the Vedic tradition. For example, Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra are not equal. And yet, by doing the job that they are best capable of doing, they produce the greatest good they can produce, and that is perfect and ideal. And yet, just like head is not equal to the legs, because head is necessary while legs are not necessary for life, similarly, no two things are ever equal. And so, perfection and ideality do not require equality. A universe of infinite diversity can be ideal if everything is placed ideally in its appropriate role, duty, and activity. That brings us to Samadarshana, or a person with equal vision. Such a person doesn't equate an elephant to a dog or a cow or a dog eater or a brahmana. If all these were equated, then words like elephant, dog, cow, dog eater, and brahmana would themselves cease to exist. We would just call them particles or things or entities, not use different names for them. The use of different names itself entails that they are not equal. And yet, everything is ideal and perfect if they do their respective jobs perfectly, play their roles ideally. So now the question arises, is the material world organized perfectly? Is the present world an ideal place? And the answer is yes. Even the material world is ideal and perfect for the type of living entities each person has become due to their past choices. Just like the ideal place for a criminal is a prison, the ideal role for a person with knowledge is a teacher, and the ideal work for a courageous person is that of a soldier. Similarly, material nature places every person in their ideally suited place, earned according to their previous choices. Of course, if someone doesn't make the ideal choices, they might end up in the prison. But even that is the ideal situation for the choices they have made. Allowing a criminal to roam free would be non-ideal. Thus, we can describe Samadarshana as non-discriminatory rather than equality. Letting a criminal roam freely is discrimination against the honest. Forcing a Brahmana to do the work of Shudra is discrimination against the Brahmana. Asking women to be like men or vice versa is discrimination against both. Denying people an opportunity to exercise their skills to deliver the greatest good based on their skin color is discrimination. But a humble sage is non-discriminatory. He doesn't expect a dog to become an elephant, or a man to become a woman, or a Shudra to become a Brahmana, but sees perfection in them doing their respective roles, duties, and activities, in them being situated in the appropriate time, place, and situation, because by that they are automatically situated perfectly. And thus, a Brahma realized person doesn't see the material world as imperfection. This world is also perfect, but in the sense that a prison is perfect for a criminal, a leash is perfect for a dog, and reins are perfect for a horse. However, to distinguish material and spiritual perfection, the Chaitanya Charitamrita talks about perfect, more perfect, and most perfect. A prison is perfect for a criminal, and a home is perfect for the honest. And yet, A home is more perfect than a prison. So the initial understanding is that everything is perfect, and a more advanced understanding is that there is greater perfection in the spiritual world. Actually, most of the Sanskrit English dictionary equivalences are false, and one example of that falsehood is translating sama as equality. The literal meaning of sama is equal emotion rather than equal cognition, because sa means each and ma means love. Thus, equal emotion is love for all. When we put a criminal in a prison, we show love for all, because the honest will be protected from the criminal and the criminal will be reformed by punishment. This is equal love for both without equating criminals to honest. We can also call it absence of bias. For example, in refusing to fight the Mahabharata war, Arjuna was being biased towards his family members and biased against the citizens being oppressed by demonic rulers. But Krishna asks Arjuna to be Samadarshina, which means don't be biased towards family members and biased against ordinary citizens. Do your duty without any bias, preference, or inclination towards family and against others. For the last few millennia, the world has seen the birth of various ideas of salvation. For example, in monotheistic religions, people attain salvation after a global war between good and evil. In some religion, a person goes to eternal heaven after exploding himself in a crowded marketplace. In another religion, people go to eternal heaven after those belonging to their ancestry return to their ancestral land. In yet another religion, people go to eternal heaven by undergoing a ritual that affirms their faith in a savior. Many other people believe that they will go to eternal life by conquering some land, or by constructing a global empire, or by building economic and military power. The fundamental trait of each of these ideas of salvation is that it is rooted in something external to the person. In contrast, in the next 7 verses, Krishna describes the internal traits of a person qualified to be liberated, and not a single external qualifying criteria is noted. It means one may or may not do one or more of the external activities, may or may not see some or the other external results, may or may not receive recognition for their work, but they are qualified for liberation if they have attained a certain type of internal state. Even more importantly, one has to accomplish this internal state change before death to be guaranteed liberation. If they haven't attained that state in this life, then they have to pursue the same state in the next life. The material existence of a person is divided into 7 layers called the gross body, the senses, the 4 internal instruments called the mind, intellect, ego, and moral sense, and the unconscious realm of anger and lust. These 7 layers are various kinds of coverings of the soul, and there is a soul beyond the coverings. Even beyond the soul is the supreme soul, the eternal purpose of each soul. And so, to attain liberation, one must separate oneself from the 7 material coverings and devote oneself to the Supreme Person. Those who don't follow this path create a religion in which a person calls service to his body a service to God. Such a religion exacerbates the disease of materialism by giving it a religious justification, and takes people to worse and worse types of criminality. Instead of giving them liberation from the cycle of birth and death, such a religion takes them to animal or hellish life. thus increasing the duration and suffering of material existence. And so Krishna describes the internal traits that qualify a person for liberation. He has in previous verses described the external symptoms, such as giving up the duality of desire and aversion to be steady in one's duty, or being like a lotus leaf in water, undisturbed by tribulations around, or seeing the city of nine gates to be separate from the citizen in that city, or understanding how karma, sin, and piety are created by selfish individualism, or that even the seemingly imperfect material world is actually perfect because it takes everyone to eventual perfection, or remaining emotionally equal towards a dog and an elephant because they are living their life as a result of their own past choices. So there is no need to discriminate against anyone. But now Krishna shifts focus onto a person's internal state. Generally speaking, the change of internal state guarantees a change of external state, but the reverse is not true. However, to change the internal state, we have to change the external state by a practice. And so the internal state change is necessary and sufficient, while the external state change is neither necessary nor sufficient. Thus, as one spends time in yoga paths, one might realize that he has been doing all these external activities and yet not attained the internal state change. It implies that there are deficiencies in the external state change, and any kind of external change without internal change is temporary. And so we must know the perfect internal state so that we can keep evaluating ourselves against that ultimate internal state and try to correct our shortcomings. The first four verses in this description of internal state pertain to the body, senses, and mind. For example, Krishna says that a transcendentalist doesn't rejoice upon receiving or achieving something desirable to the body, senses, and mind, and doesn't lament if the reverse results are achieved, but rather always remains steady in the knowledge that these don't pertain to the self. Then Krishna says that a person doesn't even desire getting something pleasurable from the external world and enjoys the pleasure within. Then Krishna says if something good or bad is received from the external world, the transcendentalist doesn't participate in their enjoyment, nor does he take the suffering too seriously, knowing that both are short lived. Finally, Krishna says that even if the senses and mind disturbed a transcendentalist sometimes, he tries to tolerate them and counteracts by his will the desires and angers produced by the body, senses, and the mind. Each of these pertain to a person's emotional state, and each of these are different aspects of becoming unselfish. An unselfish person doesn't rejoice in gain or lament in loss. An unselfish person doesn't desire external pleasure but seeks internal pleasure. But if something pleasurable is received by luck, the unselfish person tolerates it just like suffering. Even if he is sometimes disturbed by pleasure and pain, he uses his willpower to subdue and eliminate that disturbance. These things can be understood by a contrast to ordinary people. For example, when ordinary people get a promotion, they become excited. They start spending the newfound wealth on luxuries. Then they desire even more promotions and money. Eventually, they compare their wealth with others and start a rat race of wealth accumulation and ruin their health and character because they can't control their desires. Conversely, when ordinary people don't get a promotion, they become depressed. They find no meaning in life. they blame others out of anger. They find themselves lacking compared to others and start intoxication to cope with the sadness of their failure, lose their sense of self-worth, cannot stop blaming others, and are lost in the spiral of blame, failure, and sadness. And so, anyone who thinks that these descriptions by Krishna are unattainable should understand that without these attainments, their life will be ruined anyway. In fact, the reason that people avoid bad outcomes in life is because they follow Krishna's prescriptions to greater or lesser extents. For instance, they might not get too excited or depressed by material success or failure, not spend on unnecessary things, not feel sad by comparing themselves to others, not blame others for their problems, not put the meaning of their life into material acquisitions, and not be lost in the rat race of chasing material success to lose their health and character. So there is no such thing as an unattainable state. These changes are necessary to even lead a healthy, moral, and happy life. Meanwhile, anyone who disregards or downgrades these changes as unnecessary or unattainable is going to make their current and future lives unhealthy, immoral, and unhappy. After describing the detachment from the body, senses, and mind, Krishna uses three terms, namely Anta Sukha, Anta Jyoti, and Anta Arama, which literally means internal happiness, internal light, and internal garden. As we have discussed earlier, the self is seer, seen, and seeing. The seer is Anta Sukha or internal happiness. The seeing is Anta Jyoti or internal light, and the seen is Anta Arama or internal garden. This internal garden is the spiritual world, projected from the self in the perfectional state. The soul enjoys in this garden as if it is already in the spiritual world, although his body is in the material world. Ordinary people can only see the external world and they try to make it the Garden of Eden. But the spiritually advanced person lives in an internal garden. Such a person is called Jivan Mukta, or liberated, even while living in the body. Such a person sees the spiritual world and he can describe it to the people in the material world. Once a person sees the spiritual reality, he tastes non-duality, which means the best of all three material modes at once and free of the worst of all the three material modes at once. A state of duality is either pleasure or pain, either rough or smooth, either sharp or soothing. But the non-duality state is both sharp and soothing, both pleasure and pain, both rough and smooth. Since nothing is missing, there is no need for anything else. Prabhupada says that these dualities arise from doubt, which means either one thing or its opposite. Because under duality, the opposites are mutually exclusive. But in non-duality, both opposites are present at once. Now, one might think that a person who has attained such a state must isolate himself. But Krishna says that such a person works for the welfare of all living entities, which we have discussed as the greatest good earlier. Similarly, there is no selfishness, so there is also freedom from all sinfulness. Toward the end of the third chapter, Krishna had mentioned to Arjun that lust and anger are the two great enemies of the soul. Now Krishna says that a liberated soul is free from both. And so, even though he is working for the welfare of all living entities, he is not working due to lust and anger. Ordinary people may think that when such a person desires something for the welfare of all the living entities, then he is lusting for himself. Or if he gets angry for the welfare of the living entities, then he is wrathful on his behalf. But both are wrong. Such a person desires nothing for himself, and so he does not get upset even if those things are not received. And yet, such a person desires the welfare of other living entities and may even get angry to achieve that welfare. But neither lust nor anger are for himself. Just like Mother Yashoda desires Krishna's health and gets upset with Krishna if he eats mud, similarly Krishna's devotees show emotions for others' welfare. Krishna uses the term Brahma Nirvanam in each of the verses 24, 25, and 26. Impersonalists equate it to oneness, which doesn't explain how the Transcendentalist lives in an internal garden. The impersonalist nirvana shuts down the external garden without opening up the internal garden. Impersonalists believe that any kind of garden would be miserable, which clearly indicates that they have no idea about the internal garden. They think that getting out of the external garden is enough to transcend the material world, not realizing that one cannot stay devoid of all gardens for a long time. Such individuals are not truly liberated. They have plugged a leaking bucket, but they haven't transferred water to a bucket without holes. Sooner or later, the plug comes out and the bucket leaks again. Prabhupada's Jivan Mukta, always living in the internal garden. Many devotees, while painting pictures of the spiritual world, would come to Prabhupada and ask him questions about how Krishna or Vishnu looks, what they wear, and so on. And Prabhupada would give them clear descriptions. Using them, the artists were able to produce some of the best paintings ever made. Prabhupada used to call these paintings windows to the spiritual world. You look into the picture and you are looking out of a window opened in the material world and into the spiritual world. Then you see what a person living in the internal garden sees. That internal garden is produced from Antahajyoti or internal light, just like during a dream, a world is created and a person sees himself in that dream. The difference is simply that the dream is Antasukha or internal happiness, and so no one leaves that dream, and eternity of the dream makes it truth and reality. Many people these days do exercises and call that yoga. They are busy with the external world to the point that people have now invented perversions like dog yoga, beer yoga, rage yoga, hot yoga, power yoga, and so on. But Krishna describes real yoga in this verse. He says that a yogi shuts out all external sense objects. So no more dog yoga, beer yoga, rage yoga, hot yoga, and power yoga. Then the yogi concentrates his vision in between the two eyebrows and loses awareness of the rest of the body. Then the yogi stops breathing. He doesn't breathe in and doesn't breathe out. When the breathing ends, then the senses, mind, and intellect are fully controlled by breath control. Such a yogi becomes free of desire, fear, and anger. And in that state of internal perfection, he is certainly liberated. Most people think that breathing is the air we take in and give out, but it is not entirely accurate. As everyone knows, the in and out breathing requires the lungs to expand and contract. The external air doesn't expand or contract the lungs. the lungs are expanded and contracted by something internal. That internal power to move things is called prana or life force. This life force keeps working even when we sleep, due to which the body circulates blood, digests food, and breathes air automatically, even without our awareness. That is because prana acts under the control of Prakriti, cosmic time, and the demigods. And yet, even the soul can control prana through its will. When the soul gains full control over prana, then Prakriti, cosmic time, and demigods renounce their control and allow the soul to fully control their life. That autonomy of control over prana becomes the liberation of the soul, because now the soul is completely free of all the things that were previously controlling him. Now, Prakriti, cosmic time, and demigods do not control the soul's life. Rather, each soul controls his life completely. The Bhagavad Purana describes the life story of Dhruva practicing this mystical yoga. When Dhruva was insulted by his father, he went to the forest and, advised by Narad Muni, he practiced the mystical yoga that Kṛṣṇa describes here. Initially, he stopped eating, then he stopped drinking, then he stopped breathing, and then he was fully absorbed in the vision of Lord Vishnu within himself. At that point, Lord Vishnu appeared externally and pulled his internal vision out of Dhruva. Disturbed by their loss, Dhruva opened his eyes and he saw Lord Vishnu standing in front of him. Dhruva was overwhelmed with emotion. His eyes filled with tears and he could not speak. Then Lord Vishnu touched Dhruva's cheek with his conch, and Dhruva again began speaking, offering beautiful prayers to Lord Vishnu. Dhruva's practices are the mystical yoga path that Kṛṣṇa describes here. Renounce eating, drinking, and breathing, and then you will see the Lord within. There is a book called Gheranda Sangita, in which there are chapters on the various limbs of yoga. The chapter on asana states that Lord Shiva taught 8,400,000 yoga poses, same as the number of species of life. That is why these poses are called dog pose, tree pose, frog pose, tiger pose, and so on. There is a posture corresponding to each species of life. But Gheranda Sangita also states that of these vast number of poses, 32 are used by humans, and there is only one called Siddhasana, which leads to liberation. The Yoga Sutra similarly talks only about Sukhasana. The hands face upward in Siddhasana and downward in Sukhasana. The eyes are closed and the focus is in between the eyebrows. And when these are perfected, then one doesn't need to breathe. So this is yoga. The dog pose, tree pose, frog pose, tiger pose, etc. are not yoga, although they are part of the Tantra system for those who want the unique abilities of 8,400,000 species of life. But those who want to transcend the material world, the focus is not on many poses, but on perfecting one posture and controlling breath to control the mind. Unfortunately, what is propagated as yoga at present is many of the 8,400,000 animal postures to get the special abilities of animals, and then things completely outside of even the Tantra system, such as dog yoga, bear yoga, rage yoga, hot yoga, power yoga, etc. It is as if there is no clear definition of yoga when Kṛṣṇa clearly describes the mystical yoga system after describing the perfectional state of liberation. The ignorance is not due to the lack of information, Books like Yoga Sutra, Gherand Sangita, and Bhagavad-Gita clearly describe yoga. So anyone who reads these books can easily know what yoga is. Therefore, the main question is, are people truly interested in liberation and yoga? As far as we can tell, the answer is no. People are interested in becoming better animals. Finally, after describing the mystical yoga path, Krishna describes the purpose of yoga, namely Krishna consciousness. He says, he is the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities. He is the supreme lord of all planets and demigods. He is the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities. These three are the creator, controller, and enjoyer aspects of Ishvara. The creator is the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities. He created everything to benefit all the living entities, not just himself. The controller is the supreme lord of all planets and demigods. After creating, he controls everything. Finally, Krishna is the enjoyer of everything. Even as he created to benefit all living entities, that creation becomes immoral, irrational, and unhappy if the creator is disregarded. Therefore, all sacrifices, austerities, and activities should be done for Krishna's pleasure to ensure that his creation doesn't become immoral, irrational, and miserable. And yet, there are many foolish people claiming to be doing yoga without any understanding of its ultimate purpose. As we discussed, they manufacture their own type of yoga. Then, within that manufactured thing, the original thing is dominantly animal postures. Finally, ignorant of yoga's purpose as Krishna's pleasure, they think yoga exists for their pleasure. By yoga, they hope to get a strong body, after which they hope to enjoy their bodily pleasures even more. Such people never practice real yoga, never enter an internal garden, and never see Lord Vishnu within their heart like Dhruva. At best, they become better animals. Actually, this mystical yoga path is not meant for ordinary people, especially the people of this age who don't have strong bodies and minds. The Ashtanga Yoga system begins with the practice of yama, such as celibacy. It needs a very regulated life called niyama, by which one develops a strong body and mind. Because even as the life gets disturbed, a person leading a regulated life follows the routine strictly. Without yama and niyama, one cannot sit for hours in siddhasan or sukhasan. Then what to speak of renouncing eating, drinking, and breathing? All these things are done by a rare few yogis even today, who leave their home and go to the Himalayas and live alone in a cave. Since hardly anyone can do such things, hence, those serious about liberation do not take to this path. They follow other paths such as the chanting of the name of Hari, doing deity worship, and studying Vedic texts to purify their mind as given by present-day acharyas. As the mind is purified by these processes, a person can even sit in siddhasan or sukhasan for hours, gains control over his mind, and sees the internal garden. So all the results of the mystical yoga path are achieved by alternative methods which ordinary people can follow, but never by trying to manufacture one's own yoga. Prabhupada used to call these modern day practices of yoga gymnastics. Nobody stopped breathing by gymnastics. Doing gymnastics doesn't lead to internal detachment. Nobody got liberated from the cycle of birth and death by gymnastics. Nobody entered into an internal garden through gymnastics to see the Supreme Lord in it. Every gymnast can invent their own gymnastics routine. Gymnastics has no purpose other than entertainment. And yet, gymnasts get Olympic medals, which they can show off proudly to people. Gymnasts also have strong and shapely bodies, which they can show off to people. Prabhupada could see that the goal of yoga was disregarded, the texts that teach yoga were disregarded, and whatever people were already doing, such as gymnastics, was simply rebranded as yoga. Those who read Bhagavad Gita can understand these things. Those who want to follow Krishna can accept these things. That's the main purpose of these videos.